If you're in the market for an electric 3-row SUV these days, pickings are slim, but luckily, at least one of those options is not just good, it's great. And it's so great that the Kia EV9 even won one of these. We also brought one of these. That is the refreshed 2025 Rivian R1S, and we're here to see if that 7-seat SUV has the sophistication and style to take on the Kia. Today, we're gonna talk interiors, technology, safety features, how they drive, range, all that good stuff, just so we can tell you which one is best via the famous Edmunds Rating. I can't wait. These two vehicles are very similarly sized. They're pretty close in wheelbase and overall length, but there is some difference in how efficiently they use that space, and that is definitely a strength of the EV9, and it starts before you even get into the second and third rows. The captain's chairs here in the EV9 make it very easy to access the third row, either by climbing between them to get to the back row, or by pressing this button here on top of the seat and letting it slide forward. Now, I'm not a small person, but even this gap is big enough for me to easily fit through. Now, I would love to fill this vehicle with my own family to check out the roominess, but I don't have one of those quite yet. I just have 3 of myself here today, so we're going to put the EV9 through the soon-to-be patented 3 Brian's test, where I set the front seat where I like to drive, the second row where I'm still comfortable, and then see if I fit in the third row. Now, I'm just under 6 feet tall, and as you can see, I fit pretty well back here behind 2 of myself. The nice thing about the EV9 is that every single one of the 6 seats here, they all get their own air vent, their own charge port, and their own little storage cubby here in the third row, so there's a spot to put your phone as well as a drink. The other nice thing is that because we have captain's chairs here in the second row, it's easy to stretch a leg out if you want to. I have tons of headroom, and as you can see, I even have leg room and space between my knees and the second row. The second row seats they're really good. The first row seats, which we're gonna get into a little bit later, are a bit more comfortable. They got a bit more padding and one other feature that I really like. But for captain's chairs, these are really, really good. And as you can see, just room everywhere and all these things. Like I said before, a charge port and a vent for every seat. And one thing unique that the EV9 does is that you have access to the storage space here from behind the center console. It actually slides out and gives you a nice little tray or table. Then you push that aside, and now you have a bin for all your snacks. The EV9's stylish exterior is matched by, I would say, an equally stylish interior. Now, while the materials may not be quite luxury grade, the way that everything is presented and sort of looks and feels comes really close, and it's very impressive for a product from Kia. Now, I mentioned before that those second row captain's chairs are very comfortable, and they're basically as comfortable as the front seats in most cars, but these front seats are particularly comfortable for a couple of reasons. The main one being these fantastic headrests. Now, headrests are not a feature that I really like to highlight in most vehicles, but most vehicles don't have these very cool mesh headrests that are just very, very comfortable to sort of sink your head into. They have plenty of give, and they're almost basically like a really nice pillow. The other thing that these 2 front seats do is they have what's called a relaxation mode. So if you're not driving, they can actually recline and a footrest comes up. So if you're chilling in the car while it's charging, let's say, you can do so in comfort and in style. Now, problems with the interior, the one thing I really don't like about the EV9 is sort of its control scheme for the climate controls. It's actually housed in this little screen here that's a separate screen between the instrument cluster and the multimedia screen, and a lot of the functions for the climate do have to be controlled through there. For example, if I want to change the rear air, turn it up or down, that has to be done here. The problem though is that the steering wheel right now is set up where I like to drive, and with it set right here, I basically can't see that screen at all. This part of the steering wheel basically goes right through the screen, and if I want to see it, I kind of have to lean over here to be able to see all the different controls. What sort of saves it is that you do have fan speed controls and temperature controls here, so you can get some of the stuff done without having to go through the screen, but for all the stuff that you do, a little bit annoying. One other thing to mention, this thing is just absolutely chock full of features. This EV9 GT Line that we have has basically all the boxes checked. That means you get heated and ventilated seats, not just in the first row, but also in the second row. And here in the first row, you get this sort of like quasi-massage lumbar thing, which is okay, but kind of nice to have on a long drive because it helps you kind of reset your position and not get too sore. The R1S, it does seat one more passenger than the EV9 does, and that is because here in the second row, you have a bench seat instead of captain's chairs. And this is actually all you're gonna be able to get in the R1S. It doesn't even offer captain's chairs. And I do think that offering captain's chairs would actually make this interior a whole lot better, and we're about to show you why. Now, Just like in the EV9, there are buttons here on the top of either side to allow you to get into the third row, but the space that it opens up to let you get back there is much smaller. And the step-in height for this vehicle is also significantly higher. So it is much more difficult to actually climb into this third row if you're Brian-sized. The R1S is also being subjected to the 3 Brians test, and I would say that space-wise, it is kind of similar to what you're getting in the EV9. My knees, they are touching the backrest of this chair, but only slightly, and I have very good headroom thanks to this glass roof, but overall, it doesn't feel quite as roomy as the EV9 does. And again, since this is a bench, I can't even extend a leg and use that channel for that extra space. Back here in the third row, I do get an air vent and I do get a cup holder, but no charged ports back here in the Rivian. Although the third row is heated. So you do get a heated seat here in the third row and the second row, but no ventilated second row seats, unfortunately. I do want to note though that these third row seats, as you can tell, they're pretty flat and they also really lack cushioning. They're pretty stiff and I can't really recline them to sort of make them more comfortable. I think that over a long trip, they would sort of get fatiguing to sit in, especially also since this floor is too high and my legs are off the seat. If I had to be in either of these third rows for more than, let's say, 30 minutes, definitely would rather be stuck in the Kia than the Rivian. The Rivian's second row seats for a bench are quite comfortable as opposed to the third row. Plenty of cushioning here. It's very easy to kind of get comfortable and you have a good range of recline. You're able to move the second row forward and back a good amount as well. Even this middle seat here, you don't have really a really big hump like you get in some vehicles. So this middle seat actually remains usable and you're not seated up way too high. Now you do get also this nice little screen here in the back, and looking at it, you'd think that you would be able to control a lot of different climate functions. Now you can use the screen to turn on the heated outboard seats in the second row and the third row, but weirdly, we haven't been able to find a way to actually change the fan speed or the temperature. Those things are still gonna be controlled in that screen up front, and all that I can really do here is change which vents the air are coming out of, and that's kind of weird. You should really be able to change the temperature and the fan speed on your own in the second row. One other thing that I'm reminded of sitting here in the second row with the sun sort of on my face is that while this glass roof looks really nice, it doesn't quite do a good enough job of keeping the sun out. It's actually quite hot up here. If I touch this glass, it's pretty warm and you can feel that heat sort of radiating down. Rivian does offer a version of this roof though, where you can sort of hit a button and it turns opaque, and that does a much better job of keeping out the sun and heat. So if you want your passengers to be more comfortable, that's an option that you should probably check. The interior aesthetic here in the R1S matches the R1T. They basically feel exactly the same up front. You do get this really nice dark wood here and in like different places on the door and in the center console. All that feels nice. Overall though, I do think that the front seats in the EV9 are more comfortable. I also think that the second row seats in the EV9 and the third row seats are also a bit more comfortable, just more comfortable all around in the Kia. But these are pretty nice and quite supportive with a good amount of adjustment. Now, I complained a little bit about the climate controls in the Kia, but here in the Rivian, I think they're even worse. And that's because they do that thing where you can't actually move the vents around yourself. You have to go through the screen here and then change the direction of them and then sort of hope that it's actually pointing where you want it to do. It's a high-tech solution, but it's a high-tech solution to a low-tech problem. Just give me a vent with a little shuffly thingy and I'll put it where I want to put it. Apart from that though, I do like how the control scheme of this vehicle is all laid out. It's all very simple. Now these buttons here on the steering wheel, they are unlabeled, but it's pretty easy to sort of figure out what they do rather quickly. You know, this one is for volume, you know, this one is to adjust sort of the driver assistance settings as you're moving along. This is actually for a vehicle from a new auto manufacturer, really well put together. Our R1T that we got from Rivian, the launch edition, that was well put together, and that sort of continued here into the R1S as it sort of goes through a refresh. A lot to like here overall, but I do think that as I sit in this cabin, I look around and I do think that I would just rather be in the Kia a little bit more, and that is why the Kia has a higher interior score than the Rivian by just a smidge. Here in the EV9, the technology is a bit more conventional as to what you'd find in other automakers. We have wireless Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. We have a really well-placed wireless charging pad here for your phone, and everything here is just super simple and easy to use. Kia does a very good job with its menu structure, so most of the things that you need to get to are just one or two presses away. Now, that's not to say that everything is perfect, because there's one annoyance that I have, which is sort of tied to how you use the maps. So like most people, when I climb in the car, I just basically default to using Android Auto and Google Maps because it's what I'm used to. It's the easiest thing. However, Kia actually ties the battery's preconditioning system to its own navigation system. So if I'm navigating to a fast charging station on my phone, the car won't actually be able to know that it's going to a fast charging station. I actually have to dip out, go here to the native navigation, find the charging station here and then input it there, and then the battery will precondition so I'll be able to charge faster once I get to the charging station. There is no way to separate the two, so I actually can't manually precondition the battery. The only way it can be done is through this system. Apart from that, the technology in the Kia, once again, very nice and easy to use. One weird thing though is these buttons right here that are tied to the multimedia system. I do really like having a dedicated home button, and when you press these, they do give some haptic feedback so you at least know when you press them. The problem is that they're backlit, and when this bar right here is in the sun, they actually get washed out completely, and then you lose all these labels and you can't see where any of the buttons are. So, you know, they look really cool, they blend in nice with the dash, but still I think just a regular button might be a better solution. The Rivian's infotainment got a big update in its refresh. It added these very cool sort of cell shaded graphics you see here. And overall, the performance of the screen still feels super snappy. The screen is actually one of the highlights of our R1T that we've owned long term. And we've enjoyed seeing how that system has adapted and changed over the years. And now I think this is actually in its best iteration. I spoke earlier about how I don't really like that the climate controls are buried in the screen, but at least they're super responsive. They come up really fast, they respond very quickly to inputs, and it's very easy to sort of put everything away. I have to give Rivian kudos for their menu structure. Everything that you'd want to find is very easy to get to. So there's a little vehicle shortcut thing right here. I can open the charge ports, I can open the front or the rear super easily. If I want to come down here, let's say I want to see how my energy is doing and charging, all that's right here. Let's say even that I went camping, they have a camping mode with this very cool campfire right here. I can do camp courtesy, which kind of turns down my lights and things like that. And one of the things that the air suspension can do is if you're parked on uneven ground, it can actually level out the vehicle. So if you're going to sleep in the vehicle, it gives you a nice flat bed to do so in. Now with the Rivian, you're not going to get a lot of smartphone connectivity. You can connect your phone via Bluetooth, but there is no Android Auto or Apple CarPlay here, and that's kind of sad because I do really like both of those systems. That's why they're so widely used. But what kind of saves the Rivian is that I think its navigation does a pretty good job. It is particularly good at one thing, and that is finding charging stations, which is pretty important for an EV. So you just tap this one button here and it will sort of bring up all the charging stations in my area. I can choose between 6 different networks. I can even choose the speed of the charger. 150 kilowatts plus is what you probably want with something with a battery this big. But the other thing that they do in this system that I really like is you can actually see how many of the different chargers are available at each charging station. It gives you real-time updated information on which chargers are nearby and how open they are. Another thing the Rivian has going for it that you may have noticed before under this network of chargers is it includes Tesla, and that means that you have access with this vehicle to the Tesla supercharger network via this adapter. So with the addition of Tesla's supercharger network, you basically double the amount of fast charging stations that you have access to with the Rivian, and you can go over there, pull up next to the Cybertruck and be like, this is what style is. When it comes to safety technology, these two have mostly the same features. Both have excellent surround view camera systems, blind spot monitor systems that show up in the instrument cluster, and adaptive cruise control with the ability to make automatic lane changes for you if you prompt it via the turn signal. The Kia offers a rear view camera mirror and the ability to move the EV9 out of a parking spot with the remote, while Rivian says that it will add a hands-free driving system at some point, but no word yet on when that will become available. Though they have a lot of the same features, the execution in the Kia is far superior. Everything just works, while the R1S has some quirks that make it a bit annoying to live with. Its highway assist feature has a default following distance that's way too far back and you can't even change it. And those automatic lane changes, they only work some of the time. Sometimes you can hit the signal a few times and it won't move over, and all you've done is confuse the cars around you. So while I don't think that the gap between these two when it comes to in-car technology is that wide, the Rivian screen, super nice, really responsive, great when it comes to finding charging stations, and then the Kia has superior connectivity, and I would say it's a little bit simpler to use than what we have here in the Rivian. The real difference comes down to those safety features, and that is why the Kia has a pretty pronounced edge in the technology category. Let's talk about the cargo areas of these two SUVs. Now behind its third row, the Kia has 20.2 cubic feet of cargo room, which is a bit more than the Rivian, but we like to test those things out and show you what they look like in the real world. Here in the back of the Kia, we could fit one checked and one carry-on bag, and now in the back of the Rivian, we'll see how these things fit. One way that the Rivian differs is it has a split tailgate. So as you can see here, the top and bottom open independently, and as you can also see, it fits about the same amount of stuff in its third row as well. Now that's not where the similarities for these two cargo areas end. They're both about the same width, so I measured them. They're only about an inch apart when it comes to maximum width in the back, and they also have the same exact sort of mechanisms for folding down the seats. Both of them are manual folding third rows and power folding second rows. However, in the Kia, you do get cargo straps, and in the Rivian, there aren't any. You actually have to flip this lever on top of the seat, so it makes it not too bad to put the seat down, but to get it back up, you have to go through the side doors and then lift it up by yourself, and they're a little bit heavy. Now with the third row folded behind the second row, the Rivian actually has a little bit more cargo room, and it has more with both rows folded down as well, and they have basically the same features. They both have household outlets and 12-volt outlets in the cargo area. I would say that if you're looking to carry cargo, it's kind of a tie between these two, at least when it comes to in the cabin. Where the Rivian does have a big advantage over the Kia though is underfloor storage. So I actually have my carry-on bag here, and this is something I've never tried, but this underfloor compartment is so big that I think, yeah, you can actually fit an entire carry-on in the underfloor. Now the downside is that the load floor for this vehicle is a bit higher. It's 2 or 3 inches higher. Heavier things will be more difficult to load, but that is a trade-off that I would still make because that underfloor compartment is so big. Now again, where the Rivian enjoys another advantage over the Kia is when it comes to the frunk. Now the Kia, it has an okay frunk. As you can see, you can fit like your charging cable bag here, as well as my backpack. When we get here to the Rivian, this is where things really start to separate. You can fit a bunch of backpacks in there, you can fit a bunch of anything. And also this hood is powered open and closed, while on the Kia, you're gonna have to do it yourself. It's a win for the Rivian when it comes to cargo with a 9.0 versus an 8.5 for the Kia. Now, before we get into how these two vehicles drive, we do have to stop for one moment to briefly talk about price, because there's a pretty significant price gap between these two vehicles. Now, the base version of the R1S starts at a much lower price, under $80,000 and close to where the EV9 sits. So there are versions of this vehicle that are a lot more affordable, and that one has a little bit less range than the EV9, but a lot more power. However, today we are in the dual motor performance max version of the R1S, and that is why the price tag on this vehicle is so high. You're getting extra performance, an extra large battery, and that means that it's going to put up some really impressive numbers at our test track and when it comes to range. But just remember that there are versions of this vehicle that might be more your speed, and if you don't need all that performance and range, it becomes a lot more affordable. Here are the testing results for both of these vehicles at the Edmunds test track. As predicted, the R1S blew the EV9 away when it came to acceleration in both the 0 to 60 mile an hour time and in the quarter mile. Impressively, the R1S was just 0.3 of a second slower to 60 than the quad motor version that we tested previously. That's serious speed for any vehicle, let alone a 3-row SUV that weighs darn near 7,000 pounds. The Kia EV9, however, did have slightly better braking performance, and it pulled a much higher number on our skid pad, which speaks to its better balance and agility. And let's be clear, it still hits 60 miles an hour in less than 5 seconds, making it plenty quick in its own right. Now, if you're planning to do any kind of off-roading, the Rivian is really the only choice. With its air suspension, it can actually lift itself up to where it has almost double the ground clearance of the EV9. And the R1S is very similar to the R1T, a vehicle that we've taken off-road and put up against things like our Bronco and even a Jeep Gladiator, and it's really held its own against those vehicles and done things that you wouldn't even imagine trying in an EV9 unless you want to take a quick trip to the body shop. So as I mentioned earlier, this R1S that we're driving does come with the performance add-on, and what that does is it adds a lot more power. So horsepower jumps from 533 up to 665, and torque goes from 610 pounds-feet all the way up to 829. Now, is this $5,000 option box a necessity? Absolutely not. Is it fun? It absolutely is. This thing puts up, like we said earlier, very crazy acceleration times, and it hits its speed limit well before the quarter mile, so you basically trap at the same speed all the time. It's something you don't need on the street. Does it make it sort of more fun if you really want to like jam on the accelerator and sort of snap your head back? Sure, I guess so. Is it something that I would pay an extra $5,000 for? Probably not, because it's not like 533 horsepower isn't enough. One of our big complaints about the previous R1S and our long-term R1T was the suspension. It wasn't very comfortable, and any bumps in the road would jostle around anyone or anything in the cabin. So what Rivian did is they went back to the drawing board, they changed out the springs and dampers, and you still have this very cool sort of adjustable suspension where you can change the ride height, change the firmness, but I would say that across the board on all of its settings, it's way more comfortable than the previous R1S and a lot quieter in the interior as a consequence of that, because you're not just bouncing around all the time. The steering feel on the R1S is very light, and that means that it's not the most fun thing to drive on like a country road or anything like that, because you don't get much from the steering and there's a good amount of body roll. It just sort of reminds you that it's a big SUV anytime you really try to push it around a corner. I will say though that I appreciated the light effort steering when it came to things like parking or in those speed situations, although the turning radius is a bit big as you would expect. Overall, the R1S, I would say, is pleasant to drive around, and it's got a nice party trick with all of that acceleration with the performance pack. But if it were me, I'd probably nix the performance pack, go down to even the smaller battery maybe, and save a good amount of money. But really, when it gets down to comfort, the EV9 rides better, and I would say is a bit even quieter and better over road imperfections than the R1S, even after those improvements. Now that might be surprising for you to hear, because the EV9 doesn't have all that trickery that the R1S offers. There's no air suspension with different ride heights, there's no adaptive suspension to change the firmness. The EV9 suspension just feels the same way all the time, and that's fine because it's really comfortable. And beyond that, it actually makes the EV9 feel a bit more agile than the R1S does. This had a better number on our skid pad, even without being able to adjust the suspension into firm. And I would actually say that handling wise, the EV9 enjoys a slight advantage, not a big one, but a slight advantage over the R1S. Where the EV9 is down compared to the Rivian is of course when it comes to power, but I don't think that that necessarily affects the day-to-day driving experience all that much. Still pretty quick in a straight line. Under 5 seconds to 60 miles an hour is nothing to sneeze at in a 3-row SUV, and there's no point in which our vehicle feels underpowered at all when it comes to day-to-day driving. Both of these vehicles have one pedal driving in multiple region settings, and they're all very well dialed in. The one pedal is super easy to use in both and easy to drive the car smoothly. Now, I bring home a lot of different EVs, and my wife actually gets car sick in a lot of them. The one that she's mentioned in particular that she really likes how smooth it feels is the EV9. And that might not seem like a big deal to you, but for those of us who have a car sick member of our family, not having to stop so they can throw up can be a big plus. We also put both of these vehicles on the world famous Edmunds EV range test to see how far they can go on a full charge. The EV9 went beyond its EPA estimated 270 miles to join the 300 mile club, covering 306 miles in our testing. For the R1S, EPA estimates aren't yet available, but Rivian estimates 410 miles of range for this vehicle with the max battery pack. Our test vehicle also came with the 22-inch range wheels, but those don't change the range estimate at all. In total, the R1S went 386 miles on a full charge in our testing, coming in about 6% short of its estimate, but that's still a lot of range any way that you slice it. And this is also a result that lines up closely with the R1T dual motor max pack that we tested previously as well. To see the range results for all the vehicles we've looped and to check out their charging speeds as well, check out the links in the description. One thing that you notice if you drive these two vehicles sort of back to back is that the EV9 inside, it's a lot quieter. The whole experience feels a bit more luxurious and more refined, while from behind the wheel, the R1S feels a lot more utilitarian, a lot sort of more like adventure-like as you might expect. To put it simply, I just really like the way that the EV9 drives. It's great for long road trips, it's great in the city. The steering, still light. It's still not the best handling vehicle, but like I said, it feels a bit better from behind the wheel than the Rivian does. And I would say that with both of these, they are overqualified when it comes to acceleration. Just one is even more so. And that's sort of why they end up with the similar driving score, because even though the R1S, yeah, it offers you a ton more acceleration and a lot more top-end power and performance, I actually kind of like driving the EV9 day-to-day a little bit more. And so that's how they both end up with an 8.5. It can be a bit tricky to talk value between these two particular vehicles because they have such big gaps in price, but this score is meant to reflect the overall value of the entire lineup for that model. So we're gonna talk about each of these individually and then see how they line up against each other. Now, starting here with the Kia, this Kia is basically the most loaded EV9 that you can buy. And topping out of that price, I would have to say that it really feels like it's worth the money. It feels cool and futuristic while still getting the fundamentals down right. There's value to be found up and down that lineup. The same thing is true of the R1S. The base trims on the R1S compare actually to the top trims of the Kia, and the nice thing about the R1S is that the interior is basically just as nice on a dual motor regular battery pack as it is on a quad motor max battery pack. Now, of course, you can add options to it, but it is nice that you're not losing any quality by getting the lower tier R1S. The Kia will allow you to purchase things to further customize your vehicle. Got a favorite basketball team? Well, for 40 bucks, you can buy a color scheme to match the NBA team of your choice for the infotainment. And if you want more performance, you can spend $900 to unlock additional torque, though that's something that we don't need to do since it comes standard on the GT line we have here today. But at least those are one-time purchases, while the Rivian goes the subscription route. Want to use Spotify or Apple Music in the infotainment? You'll have to cough up $15 a month for the Connect plan. On top of that, some of the safety features like the automatic lane changes and the highway assist are part of the Rivian Autonomy Platform Plus safety package, and Rivian says they plan to start charging for that next year, even though we don't know if the hands-free system will even be ready by then. Ultimately, if you want to pay for these things, that will be up to you. But this just shows how in some ways these car companies are becoming more like tech companies. And while you might be used to paying a subscription for Netflix, paying one to unlock features on your vehicle might not feel so good for the time being. So while all that is a bit speculative, the value score is just based on the vehicles that we have in front of us today. And even though both of these vehicles have pretty high price tags, I think that there is value to be found in both the EV9 and the R1S. And that is why they both tie in value with an 8.0. So after all of that range driving, track testing, cargo loading, and interior sitting, here's where things stand. This is a good time to mention that if you want any more information about these vehicles or to check out their full ratings, head over to Edmunds.com. So now it's time to reveal the full Edmunds rating for both of these vehicles and tell you which one the winner is. The refreshed Rivian R1S has an Edmunds rating of 8.4, which is very, very good. But that's not quite good enough to knock off our reigning Edmunds top rated vehicle of the year winner, as the EV9 has an overall Edmunds rating of 8.6. The EV9 fights off a very strong challenge from the Rivian based on what I would call its wider appeal. This is going to be the right choice between these two for a much wider range of customers. I think that at its price, it offers better value for money than the Rivian does. And I also like how easy its technology is to use and the fact that you have those smartphone connectivity options so you can kind of use it in the way that you really want to. I also really enjoy the EV9's interior, and as I said before, I might buy this one based on those headrests alone. They're so comfortable that they want to make me take a nap either before or after I drive. While it's true that the Kia might not offer the performance or the range that the Rivian does, I think that the use cases in which the difference between 309 miles of range and 386 miles of range don't really happen very often. So in the day-to-day, the Kia offers plenty of performance and range to get you through basically anything that you'll need to do. Now, even though it has a slightly lower rating, I do think that for some people, the Rivian is going to be the clear choice, especially if you want to go off-road or if you have a very sort of adventure-oriented lifestyle, or if it's just important to you to have the vehicle with the most performance and range that you possibly can. And of course, you could also just prefer the way that the Rivian looks, because I think it's a very cool looking vehicle. So if you are shopping for an electric 3-row SUV, there may not be many options out there, but it is comforting to know that there are at least two that are pretty good. Thanks for watching.
I can hear you rubbing your shirt. This is gonna be Rivian, second row and third row, egress and...
Ingress. You have to ingress before you egress.
And I digress.